Welcome to the Westminster tradition where we unpack lessons for the public service. I'm Alison Lloyd-Wright, Managing Director of the Good Trouble Group and a recovering public servant. And joining me today on Ghana Land are my fellow recovering public servants, Caroline Crozer-Barlow.
Hello, Alison.
And Danielle Elston, Managing Director of Good Government Advisory.
Hello, Alison.
So today we have a quotation marks routine payroll upgrade that became a billion-dollar fiasco, the Queensland Health Payroll. Tens of thousands of frontline staff underpaid, overpaid, or not paid at all, and a commission of inquiry that called it one of the worst failures of public administration. Danielle, what sent you down this rabbit hole? Your obsession with getting payroll right, or the fact that we haven't done a digital transformation disaster for a few weeks?
Look, both, but a couple of things just to kick off. One is I was actually doing some stuff on change management, looking for a case study, and Caroline and I have come back to this one about 10 times in the last year and not ended up doing it. And then I was a little bit reticent on the by computer doesn't work, people harmed, it does feel like a theme. But I couldn't help myself this time just because I do have a borderline obsession with correct payroll. And so it kind of meets about 10 of our normal red hot buttons here.
Excellent. Well, take us through what happened.
Look, here's the kind of headlines in the short version. In 2007, Queensland goes for a shared services kind of payroll HR overhaul, and IBM wins the contract for about $98 million. Spoiler, watch the numbers grow through the very short version of the story. So they're going to deliver SAP and WorkBrain. I'm not sure what either of those things are. I'm sure they're just names for computer systems. What happens really quickly, though, is the scope shifts really fast, and doing it for the whole of government collapses to doing it for just Queensland Health because they have a legacy system that's expiring or about to become unsupported, Lattice. So instead of being that strategic long project, it's instead of doing that, let's just whack-a-mole this massive problem we have over here. And they thought Queensland Health was a good place to start. When we all know that
complexity in those arrangements, no.
9 to 5, standardised widgets.
Seriously, I literally can't think of another department with more complex. 85,000 staff by the time it's all reviewed. They've got that many awards in health, 24/7 rostering, almost bugger all people on salary, to be honest. And if they are on salary, even that moves and changes depending on whether you worked Sunday or not. So they, instead of doing it for the whole of government and starting with, DPC where most people are on a salary, they think Queensland Health will solve our problem there. So they get moving with the usual caper and they start testing, and like a few of the other ones we've done before, there are thousands of issues in testing, warning signs are everywhere, but the go live just keeps getting pushed and in some ways not moved because this other system is going to collapse and fall over. And so we've stopped doing digital transformation and started to already, before we've even turned it on, do a rescue package. So they turn it on the 14th of March 2010 and chaos reigns immediately. So almost 78,000 staff have either the wrong pay or no pay across successive cycles. So not
Sorry, can we just
off.
pause there? Yeah,
Yep.
78,000 staff wake up every second Tuesday and look at their payslip and think, I wonder if this is right. Is that literally what's happening?
Well, I think wrong is probably better than those who either didn't get one or are less so open to their payslip, because we all know no one can remember their login for that.
More so checked their bank account.
Right? Rolled over, it's payday. I've been off the coffee for 2 days.
Their mortgage payment auto-deducted and now they're overdrawn.
Right, and there's nothing there. So there were some overpayments, but I'm always of the view but government can just getting that money back in a very slow fashion. But the over and under payments ended up in the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. So in a shocking kind of development, there's big protests outside the Brisbane and Women's Hospital. Unions are raising tax revenue, end of financial year risks to workers, because we're now getting to the point where if you're not actually sure what you earned last year, you can't put your tax return in.
Oh, God, yes. They did it on June 10th. This is March. They did it in March, but now we're in June. Okay, I get it.
Yeah, so it's still The other kind of couple of jaw-dropping details are things like the system starts paying deceased staff and even put a deceased staff member back on a roster. So there's this kind of like level of distress. So we're going to get into like the procurement and the legal advice and stuff, but a little bit like some of our other stories. And I'm already doing a segue here. But do either of you two remember, I reckon I couldn't find it on Google 5 minutes ago, but I reckon it was about 2011 and something happened at the bank that the South Australian government used, and you were supposed to get paid on a Thursday and none of the pay runs happened until either the Saturday or the Monday. And like the state kind of ground to a standstill. And then there was the issue of like all of the fees and, like, you know, for all of the auto deductions of mortgages that hadn't gone out, and the government having to go to like landlords and say if your rent was 3 days late, that was our fault. And like not paying large groups of people is like an economic collapse issue as opposed as well as all of this personal harm kind of issue. Lots of people are waiting for payday. Like I would argue most people are like, I know on Thursday life's going to get better for 24 hours until it all goes out the door and then, you know, I've got to wait another 10 days to be fluid again. So obviously they know they've got a problem. It's not a hidden problem, this one. This one's a very out in the open problem. So they did independent reviews. We'll get to some of the inquiries. Eventually, effectively, the stabilisation of this operation cost $1.2 billion.
Oh, my God. That is so much money.
An inquiry was held and the Commissioner, Richard Chesterman QC, said the project belongs in the front rank of failures of public administration. And the government ultimately actually banned IBM from new contracts pending kind of procurement reforms and ICT reforms. And there is a legal kicker that we'll potentially get into, which is in 2010, the state signed a supplemental agreement, a settlement that released IBM from future liability on this project. So when the Queensland government later sued IBM, the Supreme Court held that was like that supplement agreement held and the case was dismissed and the costs were against the state government.
So
my God.
The 2010 deal shut the door on damages later.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
That sounds like a dud deal. I'm putting a little pin in that one. I don't know if anyone else noticed, but it felt to me like that seems like a bad deal.
Well, I think we might get to it, but like part of it was also that like the liability in the first contract was limited to the value of the contract. So once we're at 1.2 billion, the 98 million is starting to look quite a lot like chicken feed.
Jesus Christ.
So let's start with the kind of human impacts. Definitely, you know, like we said, people looking in their bank accounts, realising that their auto deductions have auto deducted despite there not being money in there, and now they're overdrawn.
So they had to get food banks and stuff. Like they literally had to get charities involved to make sure that people who had $0 but were expecting to get paid could access food, that their electricity wasn't cut off, a combination of unions and government and various patchwork solutions. Can you imagine also being a manager, like in that sense of you've got no control? Like I have control over whether GGA staff get paid. You've got no control.
Yeah.
But you've got like a team of people who haven't been paid.
Well, we've actually had correspondence in the pod inbox from someone who was affected, a couple of people actually who were affected by this. And one of the things that they talk about was that even there was kind of a pseudo gaslighting around, like you'd ring up and you'd say, well, my payroll isn't right. And they'd be like, well, what, you know, this is what your roster is. And it's like, no, this isn't my, you know, so like it was clearly distressing right from the very first moment all the way through.
So obviously payroll is a pretty mission critical thing. I appreciate that they had a system that was about to fail. One, how do you even get to the point where you have a legacy system that's about to fail on something as critical as payroll? But two, payroll isn't just boring back office stuff. Take us through this, Danielle.
I will never understand how we don't prioritise payroll systems. I would say most of the states, a couple have had recent upgrades. Everyone's always trying. I mean, you just said how can they be legacy systems? Most of them are usually 10 years out of like their aversion from 10 years ago. They are incredibly expensive. I have no idea why. I will never understand why some of this stuff is as expensive as it is. But we don't see it as like the same as a building or safety or an air conditioner or like just that kind of mission critical. It's like as long as it's kind of working. And the problem is we get more and more complicated, and the more complicated we get, the more we need these systems to do. And then the other problem we have is a couple of things. One is data protection now, and we have seen breaches of payroll data in state and in jurisdictions. And banks have a requirement of how they receive the data dump. Again, let's not pretend anyone on this podcast is an ICT expert, but they have requirements. So there's this kind of thing, whereas the more decrepit government gets, the more problematic it is. And I don't think anyone ever goes, okay, we've just put the new one in. Can someone put in a budget bid for 7 years' time for the upgrade? What we do is we wait until like the errors are too problematic and all of that kind of thing, and then we put in a budget bid, and then 3 years after it's kind of lost borderline all support, we roll out a new one. So I have a real problem with a couple of things. One is the people who run lots of people who make big decisions are salaried, and payroll is just not of concern for them. And I have had payroll in agencies with 24/7 rosters, and it is kind of beyond the comprehension of a lot of leaders who have been on salaried and then, of course, gotten so further away from actually even knowing which day is payday. Like I always think not knowing what day your payday is the ultimate kind of financial luxury if you don't know when you're getting paid. And so when we make these decisions and systems, we kind of – I don't think we see them as critical as they actually kind of are. I think we continue to buy systems that don't seem to understand 7-day-a-week rostering for some bizarre reason, and they have trouble with maternity leave. The two things public sector payroll systems have trouble with is 24/7 rostering and maternity leave, which just like I'm like, maternity leave, that's a new idea. I'm so glad that we're on the cutting edge of figuring out how to make sure you get paid correctly for that for the next 12 weeks or 18 weeks or whatever you've got. So I just like 85,000 people, and of course they were planning on rolling it out to the entire public service, so we're just sticking with Queensland Health at the moment, but I just don't think we give payroll enough credit and remember that whilst the decision making in the room with the big screen, it's kind of yet another project and it's gone to risk and audit and all of that kind of thing. For everybody else, it's actually the reason, like, it's the reason they work for us. It's not for the joy. It's to get paid.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a factor, which is pay is inherently so complex and no pay run is ever going to be 100% correct, that there's like an acceptance of error that means that this just doesn't kind of, we're not as invested in getting it 100% right?
Oh my God, that's such a good point, Alison. I really think there is something in that, because it's true. Every pay run you run, there's always an error. And like when you've been a manager for a long time, you will end up, you talk to the payroll people and they'll be like, that's all right, we'll do a correction in the next fortnight, blah, 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 blah. And so this balance of where do you go from an error that is acceptable, and actually I don't think we should spend all our money getting payroll 100% perfect, because of course
I agree.
Like there's a diminishing tail. It's like, how do you know where you are on the curve is such a good point. I think the other thing about complexity, like just a little sidebar note, I had a go at my beautiful eldest child because I was like, you are getting underpaid. There is no way that they're paying you this much. This can't be your award rate. Not in the public service, in fairness. And then I spent an hour and a half on the Fair Work Commission, and I finally discovered that under this particular award, under this particular junior rate, in fact, you could be paid way less than the minimum wage. A whole other conversation. Even though 18 years old. And it occurred to me at that point, like just the diagram of how you go through these things is so complicated. And exactly as you say, Danielle, so rarely are executive leaders spending their time going through the decision tree of, am I a category 1 or a category 2? And have I come off my 3 months of special or am I not? I just think there is a kind of, it feels very robo-debt to me.
Well, there was a case recently in the South Australian Employment Tribunal about I think it was about kind of wage loading, travel allowance stuff. But it was essentially, it went to exactly this question of like, where is it appropriate to be on that bell curve of like, we'll get it right at some point. You'll get your money at some point.
Yeah.
But we haven't got it right now. And certainly the finding in that case was very much, this absolutely needs to be a priority of executive leaders.
Oh, and I think you'll find that shift workers across the country in public sector roles kind of do accept that if I work OT today, it might be 5 weeks until, because I've missed this payroll run, because a pay run ends like seemingly on the first day of the pay.
Yes.
Fortnight. I've
So
never quite
weird.
grappled with. And so it won't go in until the next one, and then this will happen, but that doesn't actually get paid for another 2 weeks. And so like one of the challenges there, particularly in a workforce shortage, is we want, if we ring up and we want a nurse or an AMBO or a firey or someone to come in tomorrow on Sunday and it's OT and it's not their day at work. Like, I don't know, maybe connection to dopamine's just big in my house, but like long time to get your reward. Right? And they seem to just go, oh, well, once I work it, I don't get it. I don't get it for ages. And there doesn't seem to be, like if a small business did that, the FWO would have a significant problem with some of the way government does payroll. And I think part of the thing with government payroll is you do always get paid in the end. So one of the reasons we have trouble with it outside of government is, they're dodging it and they're not going to pay it, whereas the government payroll issues are, you will always get your money. Hopefully Nana can lend you 50 to get you through. But like there's no question of the government not paying its wages.
Yes. They're always going to be good for it, you would hope.
That's true. But have you had the experience of, like I have had the experience of staff who've come on and they've messed up payroll, and I have literally been like, should I go to the ATM and I'll give you some cash and you can pay me back? Like I have like my own cash, because I have been so anxious about, like I reckon we've all talked about this before. Like there is definitely, that is a lived experience, right? That
like a snoozy laissez-faire approach to like, we'll pay you. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And so I think this is, I think the thing that gets me about this, and we can get to, how they had, we're going to get to, how they have two different types of governance and all the things we always see when we think that the computer's going to fix it, and it turns out you still need leadership and you need to understand the thing you do as well. You need two things, leadership and an understanding of what the function is. But I think the reason why this one gets you is because it's like a bit like Robert. It's like, we've seen this, but this is the big scale version of that time that all the so-and-sos didn't get paid.
Yeah.
So payroll, inherently complex. We accept it's never going to be 100% right. Even big corporates struggle with this one. What went wrong here, Danielle? How did we go from this is going to be a $98 million project to 1.2 billion of whoopsies?
Yeah, and
that's brilliant. I'm using
is that on someone's CV? Do you wonder?
Do you wonder if
1.2
billion of whoopsies?
We'll add that to the list of potential merch.
Although, can I just say, like $98 million, I again never professed to be an ICT procurement person. Sounds really low just to me to start off with for a system of this scale. So, look, similar to most things, basically underestimated complexity. I think it goes back to that, the whole, when you have public value and rules and various industrial complexities, it's actually not the same as a lot of private sector organisations. And so they came in with this template mindset is what the inquiry report basically says. So, and government didn't really push back on that. They were like, that sounds like a solution. It sounds really nice. And it seems to me that, one of the really, just to kind of segue, one of the really tricky parts is they had set up this other mob called Corp Tech. So, and this is not, again, this is so familiar. The BD government wanted to get a central ICT agency set up, and we see this all over the place, which is, government departments are not delivering on ICT reform, they're just tinkering. We're going to get really smarter people who presumably we couldn't get to work in the agencies in the first place, are going to run this central.
And are inherently in the private sector somehow.
Yes.
And so it was this initiative where it was like, these are the guys you go to when you want to standardise your corporate services across departments and bring in ICT solutions. It kind of wasn't meant to be a IT shop. It was like an implementation, like a PMO come digital transformation reform agenda. And it was under
digital transformation office, perhaps?
Something like that.
Sorry.
Whatever. No, you're right. But it's like one of those types of things. So immediately they're supposed to deliver something like all digital transformation officers, and they're immature and under-resourced. They don't really know what they're doing, and they take on this health payroll replacement, and they don't know how to do health payroll. And so health is like the customer, but corp tech. And can we never call anything in the public service a unit? I can't even say it without tripping over it. Just makes me.
What is
the alliteration?
Industries worldwide.
Yeah, I'm seeing a video. That's exactly what I'm saying. I'm seeing like a Utopia video, like black skivvies. Anyway, I digress. Corp tech. And so they get this gig, so to speak, to, right, well, we were going to do sheds, we're going to do it everywhere. Oh, now we're just doing it in health. Oh, health's in trouble, we're going to go and help them. So they'd never delivered a project, certainly not of this scale. They didn't know anything about health payroll, which like there would be a woman in Queensland Health, and it would definitely be a woman who would be early 60s, possibly not friendly, who had a granular understanding of the 99 different awards, but did she get a tea break? Or she didn't get a tea break because there was an arrest, then I've got to add the $11. And but like these people are not involved. It's like Corp Tech and Queensland Health, who are the customer. Of course, in a shocking development, the Commission finds like, oh, this is pretty confusing, and it doesn't like who's in charge. Is it the customer, Queensland Health, or is it Corp Tech? Who's making decisions? Who can say no to things? So the actual government wasn't really internally sorted out when they procure. That's what I'm looking for. Procure IBM to build this thing.
Yeah, from memory, right? Wasn't there like the IBM ex-contractor who comes in to help them kind of start doing this procurement, and he's like, well, you guys are talking to all of these other big IT outfits, but I reckon IBM have got a thing for you. And then he kind of, with massive probity and procurement issues, then contracts IBM to do it. And like, all the probity and procurement stuff aside, what really strikes me is the wild lack of commercial and contract management expertise. Like that there was no one who was this guy's boss saying, it seems weird to me that we're signing this contract that says our liability, reclaim is limited to $98 million, or that we can't force you to come through to completion. Like they were such an immature organisation, and they had learned none of the lessons about how to do things, that they just kind of tried to outsource everything and just be that light touch middle bit. And this shows you what happens when you do that.
So and you can kind of see the attractiveness, right? Like, it is hard to get, but also of the Queensland Health Corp Tech thing. So we struggle to get people who are good at this stuff inside agencies. So there's probably someone who went, well, if there's only 5 people who are any good at this stuff, let's put them in one spot and just do one agency at a time. We can't build critical mass of skills inside agencies.
Yeah.
But like no one's in charge, which is always a problem. I mean, it's probably less of a problem at $98 million than it is at $1.2 billion, but like no one's in charge.
So as the one of us who hasn't read literally anything about this and is just waiting for you guys to inform me, here's what I've got so far. They decided to do the whole thing, narrowed it down to health, went through some potentially shady procurement, have an absence of governance or insufficient governance.
Or lots of governance that does nothing. There seems to be a lot of meetings.
Lack of clarity of governance.
But not a dude, lady, charged person.
Did they know what they wanted?
Yeah, payroll.
Right. But because they lacked that complexity about rostering, and were there any red flags at any stage that this was starting to go wonky?
Oh, like from the very beginning. Again, usually middle and lower people doing I can't see how this is going to turn on payroll system at all. And everyone else going, no, the governance group got a traffic light something, and very similar story. And I mean, we're not doing a whole series on this one, so I do want to kind of whiz past it. But this is exactly the same stuff that where people on the ground are saying, I was a user tester person. I user tested, done work. And them going, okay, we'll keep fixing it and keep moving through, instead of going, no one seems to have used it yet and gone, oh, this seems to be doing the right thing, because they're under this enormous pressure to deliver. Like, I wonder what the balance is between you can't leave this stuff just to go on for 2 decades and never turn it on. We go to universal credit and robo-debt and everything else. But also, how long do you give people? Is it the pressure versus, I don't know.
Because at some point the legacy system is going to fail and you're going to keep finding errors no matter what. You have to turn it on anyway. Yeah. So they turn it on, no one gets paid. Then what happens?
Look, they spend about 10 years fixing it and rebuilding it. They have to employ 1,000 additional payroll officers. So it was good for employment and the economic something or other in Queensland. So, I mean, we have to remember that people used to manually pay you and that worked quite well in its own way, which was, it was like, okay, Caroline, you worked 35 hours. Here's your little yellow envelope. Did either of you two get paid in cash, or did I start work before you two? Probably.
I never got paid in cash.
The big dub pay window, and you could only go in certain hours and you get your little yellow, orange envelope. So they have to employ 1,000 people, because effectively what you get to is basically every number needs to be checked over and over again, and every bit of changed over time has to be done manually, and all the things that aren't standard, which in a health system is almost everybody's pay, now need eyesight oversight for years and years and years and years. And they over time do fix it, obviously, because it's 2025 and this story starts in 2007. But it takes about a decade. I mean, I think it's close to 10 years after they turn it on that the legal parts of it start to be concluding in various kind of
So take me
cases.
through the legal parts. Who sued who? For what?
Look, it was the state suing IBM. So, again, they kept getting kind of advice from the beginning about whether they should terminate or keep going, which is always such a question, because ICT projects never run well, even when we're not in this territory, right? It's like, do we keep pushing on or do we start again? And you kind of almost always have to keep pushing on, and I do have empathy for that. Otherwise, how are you going to pay people? Let's be serious. So they had to the first thing they have to decide in June 2010, which is 16 weeks after they turn the thing on, is whether they terminate it based on their operational needs. And then in November, they sign this supplemental agreement that I just can't quite wrap my head around, and we could probably get some contract lawyers to do 2 episodes on, which was they were going to keep going. They were going to basically close off the original project, and it kind of settles and releases IBM from any claims or ties to the project. And then another 3 to 6 years later, the Queensland government starts suing on misleading conduct theories.
Because there's a change of government, right? It's worth saying.
Sure.
So BD 2010 does the deal with IBM to make sure they don't walk away, because for some reason they thought IBM would just leave this steaming pile of poo and walk away, and so they felt they had to sign this piece of paper to get them to stay on and fix them. That feels a bit wild to me, but anyway, 2013 you get Campbell Newman, right? And he's like, I am going to get the state's money back. No, you're not. You're going to pay their costs in this particular kind of and so there's something interesting for me about that as well, the way in which the politics played into the contract management, right? BD does a dirty deal and Newman does a different thing. None of these are necessarily in the interests of the public, right?
Yeah. 100%. And again, it feels like requirements are over here, people who can build computers are over there, lawyers are over here, and that the legal elements, just like the requirements element, borderline had nothing to do with the project, and Crown were called in and they'd look at something and write something, but not kind of in the practical elements of it. There's nothing when the inquiry kind of says, but the lawyers were saying, and it was like, yeah, but the lawyers wouldn't tell us how we could keep paying people or all the other bits.
Yeah. Yeah. And the lawyers couldn't make that ultimate decision that Alison's talking about, which is, are you willing, like, what's your risk tolerance for people not being paid correctly, right? Like, how much, where is the line at which this is not an acceptable system or not? And how much are you willing to hold that up against a system that might break if you add another 5 years of different complexity to it, and that's your legacy?
And every second Thursday, you're going to be testing this thing, right? So like, it's not quite COVID, but there's not a lot of time here to mess around. It's not I can't think of a better way to describe it, but every second they're going to get a performance review every 14 days.
Yep.
And so the legal decisions kind of aren't lining up or aren't being considered as a part of the operational decisions.
Yeah.
And so we end up with an inquiry here.
Shocking.
What did the inquiry actually conclude? What did the government do? How did this all kind of come to an end?
So he was, again, Caroline's right, there's a couple of changes of government over the course of this 15 years in general, and each time some of these changes. Ironically, if you take the lens of that off, this is the kind of thing that's good for an inquiry. We should learn something from it, all of those kinds of things. So even if you take the political lens off, I think it's all a pretty valuable process. So Commissioner Chesterman was kind of asked, like, why was the money all lost, whether they could get any of it back, kind of how we ended up in this level of distress for the workforce. Mainly found that IBM should never have been appointed as the prime contract, and that there were those systematic governance failures on the government side, and they were in two parts. One was the probity and procurement.
And that's why IBM shouldn't have been appointed, because of the probity and procurement failures, or because they actually couldn't deliver the thing?
Both. I mean, Caroline, feel free to jump in. I know this is your area of love in relation to this particular scandal.
Yeah, no, both. Right.
And then the other governance failure was, of course, even if we were in and they were the right people, no one was in charge of the project itself. And so you can argue that one wouldn't have happened and it still would have been as bad in some ways, to be perfectly honest. So they were the two biggest findings, was that there was a problem with the procurement and probity, and then there was a problem with how the project was run or not run. And then the Premier then announces that IBM was banned from state contracts until it demonstrated improved governance and contracting practice. I think this is interesting in the light of some consulting firm things and stuff, which is
just the last few weeks.
Just as a question of, like, is that the answer? And not that I think it's not the answer. I think it's all but it's a very good announcement, I suppose, is what I would say. And I'm not sure how much further we get to better commissioning, procurement, relationships.
It's still very much a bad apple characterisation, right? Rather than a systemic problem characterisation. Like, there's one bad apple, IBM, or, insert other consulting firm or similar in here, and we're not going to use them anymore, rather than a reflection
Our whole setup is not working. We don't have appropriate expertise to manage these contractors. We don't, like, you're exactly right, Alison. It's a complete misframing of where this systemic problem is.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, the stabilisation program ran for nearly a decade, right? And the prolonged cleanup of the defects and the workarounds, and, I think there were some things that 7 years later you were still, with these new 1,000 payroll officers, putting in a manual hire duties because the system still couldn't recognise it and that kind of thing. Huge cost, huge manual effort. Like, we really moved back not just to like a half-broken lattice, which is what the name of the system was before, but like kind of 70s style of the degree of manual processing that had to go on for years and years and years. So in the end, of course, you end up with a system that does work, but at extraordinary cost, extraordinary harm, and the state can't do anything about it because of the 2010 supplemental agreement that they signed, releasing them from, in some ways, risk. So government carried all the risk.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point to explore further because that is the question in these big contracts, isn't it? Is where does the risk live? And like we've discussed before, can you ever, as a government, actually outsource the risk in the eye of the punter down the pub? Probably not. It slates back to you anyway. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm reflecting, we've had a couple of stories, so post office and then also in Robodebt, where there have been these go live, don't go live kind of questions where you have acceptance criteria that are sort of not met and then they kind of get inch closer and closer to kind of being met. And then there's a point at which everyone says, look, I'm just going to eat this stinky omelette. It doesn't matter. I don't know why I went with omelette for my metaphor.
I was going to say that's interesting, but keep going.
Anyway, I'm going to eat this poo sandwich, and we're just going to go forth because sunk cost fallacy, all of the different things. I think, when I listen to this story, I mean, it's the Irish. How do you get there? Wouldn't start from here. But if I was in this particular situation, I keep coming back to the Tom Loosemore episode that we did, where he talks about. He has this thing about, reinvent procurement, buy or rent services that support teams, not simply to whom outcomes are outsourced. And I really feel like that is one of the things that's happening. So the lack of governance, Danielle just could not agree more. Split masters, as one of our dear leaders says, single throat to choke, very helpful. But the second one for me is and this is, I think, what you're saying, Alison, in a way that might resonate with people differently. You can't outsource risk, so stop trying to outsource your outcomes. Instead, you are accountable and responsible and you buy in the expertise you need. So Tom talked about, get ICT contractors, totally fine, but they come and sit in and work for you. Yeah. And you have the expertise in-house to make that happen and stop being subject to the outsourced providers' versions of what was going on. I mean, I think this is just a classic example of that.
Yep.
And we've all kind of been a bit there, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't seem super weird.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
You don't know. I'm not a computer nerd. I don't know what the IT, an API, what? Sure. If you say so. That sense of being kind of befuddled and confused by tech specs and jargon and things like that.
It's such an uncomfortable feeling to not know what you're paying for in the same way as you do X numbers of, cubic meters of concrete and so I just wonder whether we're when we look at these, a lot of these are all culture, etc., but they're often ICT procurement failures, some of them, and I just, there's a theme is all I'm saying.
I wonder if sometimes we generalists, so not speaking for all the people, but for we as policy generalists, if we let ourselves off the hook on this, where we're like, oh, look, that's kind of impenetrable black box knowledge, so I couldn't possibly work out what an API is or whatever. I think it's somehow we in our lives are smart enough to pick up kind of enough specialist knowledge to be able to interface into a lot of sectors. But I agree there feels a lot less impetus to pick up that knowledge to interface into ICT. And then every now and then, or not every now and then you meet people who are really good boundary riders in that ICT space. And South Australia has some crackers. Shout out to you, Scott Bayliss, but also Alison Beck. We've got some really, really good people who do that. But what then we tend to do is we tend to kind of shove them in ICT parts of the world and you don't let them bleed into the kind of broader, you don't treat them like generalists with specialist expertise in ICT, So I think there's something for me I'm really taking from this about how we still seem to think of the world as two halves, ICT over there, everything else over here.
So any final reflections on this one before we bring the plane in for a landing?
Some of the usual ones, it's always helpful if someone who knows the work is in the room at the time. And in this case, payroll work is usually quite junior work. Frequently, the manager doesn't really know how to do it, let alone anyone above the manager. put in budget bids for new systems the day you turn on your old system and just start the conversation then. And I think in this one, actually, one of the take homes is don't keep calling the lawyers at the last minute. Like the contract management part of this is central, and it appears like they got the template, they had a meeting. I'm not saying that the Crown lawyers who wrote it didn't know what they were doing, but the process it wasn't an embedded part of the procurement and the process, and the delivery wasn't, hey, what does that clause mean? What happens if we can't turn the computer on? Like those kinds of things is probably one of my other takeaways.
And from you, Caroline?
I mean, I think it's nice to revisit another one of these and kind of think about the threads from all of our previous episodes on this as well. And it's like, so I've really enjoyed just kind of rehashing over some of that content that we've done before. But I thought Danielle said it best before. She was like, leadership was really important and content was really important, and it was missing both of these things.
Yeah, so I think, what we've learnt here is payroll isn't just a spreadsheet. It's people's lifeline. It's what's paying for their groceries. It's what's paying for their rent. The inquiry said what needed saying, which is the government made its statement by freezing out IBM and the courts closed the book. No recovery, just lessons. One of the biggest ones is being clear about when you're going to turn the system on, protecting your acceptance gates and never trading away your remedies in the rush to get something on. This episode's Westminster Tradition mug is going to Cressida Wall, who has been messaging us on LinkedIn asking for more Westminster Tradition merch. But until we have merch saying not all ministers or generosity of the patriarchy, you'll have to make do with a Westminster Tradition podcast mug winging its way to you now. That's all for us today. Till next time.
Just some appropriately bureaucratic disclaimers. While we've tried to be as thorough in our research as busy full-time jobs and lives allow, we definitely don't guarantee that we've got all the details right. Please feel free to email us corrections, episode suggestions or anything else at thewestminstertraditionpod@gmail.com. Thanks to Pampot Audio for our intro and outro music. Till next time.